Alright, hey guys, real quick, I just want to let you all know this video was recorded a couple days ago, made by TheVolgun, and I had originally posted a video here that was from the infographic show, and the main reason for doing it is it was a little shorter, and that way I can really just get an in-depth view of how the SCP Foundation actually all works and everything. But people have been telling me that the Volgun version, the one I originally intended to release, was actually goes way into more detail and actually goes very specific on how everything actually works. So it's about 35 minutes long. And also, on a quick side note, there are going to be some moments where I'm not really talking, not really saying anything, and there are going to be numerous just because there's so much information, but it's just actually me trying to grasp everything because this guy goes through it somewhat quickly. But I hope you enjoy. I finally edited it, finally got it out. Without further ado, let's get to it. Marine reacts to SCP Explained, a modern introduction to the SCP Foundation by TheVolgun. Now, I've done 2 SCP videos so far, and I'm very excited to see kind of like what exactly is the big premise behind the SCP Foundation. I don't know too much. I know kind of a little bit now. That's kind of like what it's supposed to be, but I'm gonna go ahead and get an in-depth look at this. I'm gonna link the original video down in the description below. But before we get started, make sure you go ahead and click that like button and comment anything SCP related that you may want to see me have a reaction for. And then don't forget to click that notification bell right here. That way you get updated every time I post a new video. Been posting videos daily, even sometimes 2 days a week. Usually working on them in the mornings, and that way you guys can see them in late afternoons after you guys get off work at your own time. So let's go ahead and get started and find out what the SCP Foundation is really about.
So, you stumbled upon or heard about a thing called SCP.
Yes.
You're wondering what it's all about. This guide
Sorta.
has all the information you need to know about what the SCP Foundation is and what it has to offer you. Think
I like
of
the
it as
logo.
the ultimate primer to the universe and the wiki as it is and should be seen today. This guide is split up into 3 sections, and they are as follows. Number 1, the basics. An introduction to the SCP Foundation and wiki, covering the SCP format, object classes, in-universe lore about the Foundation, and important vocabulary, and why it all matters. Number 2, in-universe elements. This covers some background information and a lot of commonly used terms that might leave a new reader lost or confused.
Okay.
Number 3, things to read and do. A tour of the entire SCP universe, covering all modes of writing and different kinds of pieces that you can read. From -Js to EXs, 001 proposals to groups of interest, tales, and canons.
Okay, so this is like
just the SCP series.
This is kind of like just like
Okay,
as far as
let's get
like a
started.
preface as
The
to
basics.
what to expect, I'm assuming.
Operating clandestine and worldwide, the Foundation operates beyond jurisdiction, empowered and entrusted by every major national government with the task of containing anomalous objects,
Okay.
entities, and phenomena. These anomalies pose a significant threat to global security by threatening either physical or psychological harm.
So technically these guys are above the law.
Introduction. The SCP Foundation is a collaborative writing platform centering around a fictional foundation, a scientific and military organization that seeks to protect humanity and the status quo by locating and containing anomalies.
They want you to think it's
objects,
fictional.
life forms, events, locations, concepts, creations, and phenomena that, in one way or another, violate natural law. On the SCP Wiki, authors tell stories and explore ideas within this urban fantasy science fiction universe, creating rich pieces of writing that take place in a world where
So it's just a bunch of people like making their own stories, right?
people and organizations interact with them. These articles may showcase the different types of phenomena that might exist in this universe.
So technically anyone can
SCPs
create one then.
themselves, or tell compelling narratives about life and interactions within the SCP.
It's definitely a good idea though, because
canons,
you get
and groups
different
of interest
versions
formats.
of something.
The central
Or something that
focus
somebody else
of
would have
the
never
SCP
even thought
Wiki
of.
is the SCP file, commonly referred to as just an SCP. It is a set of in-universe technical documentation supposedly compiled by the Foundation in an effort to understand, analyze, experiment with, and most importantly, contain the anomaly. The SCP file is, in effect, a form of constrained writing, an immersive way to tell a story about the nature
But why would
and
they want to
history of an
contain them?
anomalous object or entity. whether directly.
And they said they could pose a threat to the world. I would assume they would try to kill them.
Each SCP is given a unique serial number or designation. And on the wiki, you can browse SCPs with
It started in
designations
2007?
ranging from 1 to 3,999.
Jeez.
They are organized into 4 numerical series. Series 1, SCP-1 through to 999. Series 1 was written from 2007 to 2011.
Alright, so it's not even talking about like an SP, it's just talking about like a story, the writers and all that. Like, kind of like the history of just like how this all came to be.
2011 to 2013.
I don't know what's up with the little weird glitching. I don't know if that's just a part of the video.
SCP-2000 through to SCP-2999. Series 3 was written from 2013 to 2017. And Series 4, SCP-3000 through to SCP-3999. This series is still being written, but it started in 2017.
Okay.
The SCP format. An SCP file has a very specific format that, in general, must be strictly adhered to. SCPs are the backbone of the entire franchise. These documents are the set pieces of the universe, showcasing its tone, stories, and possibilities. The basic format of an SCP is as follows. Item number, SCP hyphen, then the number. Object class, then
So-
a category name. Special containment
Category as in-
procedures.
Oh,
Then a
probably like
detailed
weak,
summary of all
strong,
specific
stronger,
means
strongest type
needed
deal.
to make sure the anomaly is safely contained. Description. Then a technically written documentation of all things that the anomaly is, does, and can do. And finally, supplements. Optional additional files added onto the base document. Each SCP is given an object class based on the degree of containment difficulty. Here are the primary object classes. Safe. The anomaly can be
it's like a tier
contained by
system.
simply leaving it alone. No special procedures, methods, or events are necessary to keep it from damaging the world. This does not necessarily mean it's not dangerous. A safe class object can be world-threatening if not contained, but it's just really easy to contain them.
So it's not even about how dangerous they can be.
Some notable
If they can just put them in a
examples of
box,
safe-class
then
SCPs are
it's considered safe.
SCP-1981, SCP-2579, SCP-993,
I thought it was going to be based off like how strong they are.
and SCP-3039. All examples will be in the video description.
Was that a
Next,
picture of Reagan?
Euclid. The anomaly is inherently unpredictable or requires some amount of special effort to be contained. You're not quite sure what will happen if you leave it alone, and it might be a little bit more complex than a safe class entity, object, or phenomenon.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be like an actual creature or anything. It can be like literally a thing,
SCP-3008,
like a toaster.
SCP-426,
Okay.
SCP-1171, SCP-3001,
IKEA.
and SCP-1609. And finally, Keter. These SCPs are really difficult to contain, requiring a huge expenditure of resources or extensively complex containment procedures. The most dangerous of phenomena are classed as Keter, often, but not always, posing an existential threat to humanity, the world, or universal structure itself. Some notable examples of Keter-class SCPs are SCP-1739,
A
SCP-231,
laptop,
SCP-2935,
a white picture,
SCP-2293,
looks like writing. I don't know what the bottom left is.
In addition, there are a number of esoteric and secondary classes that are used much less than the big three that I just mentioned, but still serve important purposes. Thaumiel. This is a very rare object class only known to the highest levels of the Foundation.
Anti-Keter.
In essence, Thaumiel class objects are anti-Keter. They are used in the containment or counteracting of other SCPs. They act as powerful tools to be used by the Foundation.
So they'll use
which normally
SCPs
rarely
to
uses
mess up
anomalies.
other SCPs.
Some notable examples of Thaumiel class SCPs
Right.
are SCP-2000, SCP-2003,
Is that a road?
SCP-3000,
A city? A brain?
SCP-179, and SCP-3031. And finally, neutralized. It used to be anomalous, now it's not. Maybe it just stopped working on its own. Maybe someone accidentally or purposefully destroyed it. Either way, it no longer has functional anomalous properties.
Alright, so it's just like a
Some
rare thing
notable
then.
examples of neutralized class SCPs are SCP-1470, SCP-2060,
How are they going to put a dog?
SCP-3519, SCP-1762,
Is that a paper
and
crane?
SCP-2420.
And another brain? Spider? Fuck that.
If you want to stop watching this guide now and start diving into the wiki, this is a good time to do so. But be sure to finish this guide if you're unsure of anything. Maybe you can pick one from the links from the description and then follow the cross links and navigation in
I'm
the
more
article.
curious to see like
Maybe you can go
what
to a
these Keter
series
ones look
page.
like.
I highly recommend series 2 and 3, and just click on one with an intriguing title. Or you could roll the dice and press random SCP. One of the best ways to learn about the Foundation is to discover for yourself all the genres, emotions, and ideas it can evoke, to keep that sense of mystery and gritty realism. There's still a lot to learn about the culture.
Do they also have stories, or is it just like, or is it just like always plain a description of what it is, what it can do, how they contain and all that?
Fun that way. Or if you'd like to get a better handle on everything that's going on and a few more ways to drop you into the community, stay tuned. I still have a lot to show you.
I hope so. It's a 35-minute vid.
Next up, in-universe elements. Foundation structure and protocol. Security clearance represents how much information about an object you're allowed to know. If you've read through an SCP or two, you're bound to have seen these. Data expunged, redacted, or the text completely blacked out. These keywords are common hallmarks and tools of narrative of the SCP Wiki, signifying that the information has been classified to a higher clearance or has been cleansed completely. It adds an element of horror through absence that is classic to the SCP fandom. For a great example of how security clearance levels can be used,
Interesting,
read
an absence.
SCP-2317. There are also many types of workers in the Foundation. Among them, we have containment specialists, researchers, and security tactical response officers. There are field agents who are out in the world undercover, looking for signs of anomalous activity, and mobile task forces, special units that are assigned to carry out certain dangerous jobs.
Alright, so mobile task forces are the guys who were
Contains a list of mobile
in
task forces, along with their
SCP Dollhouse and
associated
SCP Overlord.
SCPs. The Foundation is usually thought of as a far-reaching organization, and so their bases are found across the globe, and sometimes outside of it. These bases can be sites or areas.
You're talking about
For
the
more
moon?
information, read Secure Facilities Locations. The leaders of individual areas or sites are high-ranking Level 4 researchers known as Site Directors. There are few in the Foundation that rank higher than Site Director.
I'm getting Fallout vibes, sort
The
of.
ultimate leaders of the entire Foundation.
Yeah, like the Overseer.
The Overseer Council,
It's just like
abbreviated
Fallout.
to O5, is a group of 13 people who manage all Foundation operations worldwide
Okay,
and
this
have
is
complete
the
access
bigwigs.
to all information, redacted or not. Their identities are classified for safety, and they are only referred to by their ID, 051 through 13. In addition, some versions of canon also include the existence of an administrator, the creator of the Foundation. Finally,
Who is
the
it?
most interesting parts of the Foundation are D-Class personnel, or Class Ds. The canon around D-Class personnel helps showcase the colder and more morally gray side of the Foundation. In order to experiment with and contain SCPs, the Foundation needs lab rats to test things with.
So guinea pigs,
D-Class.
essentially?
Oftentimes, they are recruited from death row or the prison population, serving
Oh,
as
it's
expendable
prisoners.
personnel that are used to handle hazardous anomalies. In the early days of the site, a common headcanon was that all D-Class were executed at the end of the month. However, this idea has gone out of fashion as the site has evolved. For more interesting stories about Class D personnel, try reading entries from the D-Class contest.
I feel like that shit would suck. I mean,
Terms to know.
but he did say they were like death row
SCP
inmates,
Wiki has
so
created a
they obviously
wide
did
set of
something shitty
terminology
to be in
for new
that.
Innovations, inventing concepts that are unique to the premise of the site and found nearly nowhere else in literature. You may want to know these terms before you dive in. Anomalous classifications. Memetic, or meme. A meme is any unit of information that can spread and transfer itself throughout society. Memetic effects deal with how
So
the brain
meme.
understands and reacts to media. It is a piece of data in the subject's mind that has an anomalous effect on that subject's physical or mental state that is spread when someone else becomes aware of the same information. In particular,
It's getting a little
anomalous
confusing.
memetic agents are bits of hazardous information that are like a mental virus, triggering anomalous reactions in people who are exposed to them. Anti-memetic or anti-meme. An anti-meme is the opposite of a meme. It has self-censoring properties. Anomalous anti-memes are perfectly mentally camouflaged, whether by making you unable to hold your perception of one in your short-term memory or making you unable to comprehend the concept of its existence.
I feel like I'm getting lost.
A cognitohazard is something that is dangerous when we perceive it with one of the 5 senses. For example, a sound that causes you to bleed from every pore, or a smell that causes you to go insane. All memetic effects are a subset of cognitohazards, as in order to process the information, you have to sense it. Infohazard. Infohazards are anomalous effects that trigger when the SCP is described, referred to, or acknowledged. You don't even have to sense the thing to be affected by an infohazard. You just have to know that it exists.
So these
Effects
would
that are
be
written about the anomaly and
classifications
people
that would be
aware of the
within the
existence
tiers,
of
right?
effect.
Of like the safe, the Euclid, the Keter.
Ontokinetic or reality bender. An ontokinetic
And this is just like a general
being
term
manipulate the laws of
if you were
reality
describing like a
with
group of
magic
SCPs.
through anomalous means.
Like if you're
It's
describing
dangerous
an
to
athlete,
contain and
to
study
be more
reality,
specific, you might say soccer player or
often
football
in
player.
unethical ways, creating
I'm assuming that's
some
what this
crises
is.
for the Foundation. Anart or an artist. Anart is short for anomalous art. Many people and groups aware of the existence of reality-breaking phenomena choose to explore it by creating often surrealist art with extra-normal properties. These people being called anartists. Narrativic or pataphysical. A narrativic anomaly manifests itself within works of fiction, often affecting the content of the work involved by creating characters, changing the setting, or blurring the line between fiction and the reality. The pataphorical or pataphysical SCP explores narrativic anomalies using the wiki itself as the narrative. It explores the idea of characters we write on the website attempting to communicate and manipulate us, and being aware of things on the website like author pages, deletions, and discussion forums. Technology.
How many
and
of these are there, man?
Scranton Reality Anchor. Scranton Reality Anchors are technological devices used by the Foundation to essentially regulate consensus reality. They cancel out or prevent the effects of reality-bending entities and anchor down areas where the level of unreality is higher or lower than normal, counterbending it so that it matches the reality that we know and inhabit. Many contemporary authors have criticized the widespread use of SRAs as a catch-all for containing any type of structural or ontokinetic effect. Telekill. The SRA back in the old days. Except the problem was worse. In its original form, it was a metal that blocked all mind-affecting or compulsive effects. People went crazy over it and started using it in all their containment procedures, and mistakenly thought it also blocked memetic effects. Scranton's rewrite of the article.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to remember the majority of this.
And its usage had fallen by
All I
the
need to know
wayside
is
anyway,
SCP
as
can
people
literally
became
be
more
anything.
innovative with writing.
It could be safe, Euclid, Keter, depending on how easy the art
A
contained.
unit of measurement that measures
Keter's
the
more
intensity of
guys that could
reality
like
present
really fuck up the
in an
world.
area, crucial to understanding how SRAs and other technologies work. They are useful in quantifying how powerful reality-bending effects are relative to each other. K-class scenario, a term used to classify possible apocalypse scenarios, which the Foundation deals with on a daily basis when discussing the possible outcomes of dangerous effects or entities. The most common type is XK class, which describes a conventional destruction of the planet scenario. There are multiple minor ones whose exact definitions in canon are being argued over, including CK class, the restructuring of a reality. AK class, humanity goes crazy. SK class, the dominant species on Earth is no longer humans. And ZK class, reality universal failure. Amnestic. Mind wipe drugs.
Oh, I remember hearing
A
this.
narrative tool used by authors to explain A,
I said this in
how
the
Foundation
SCP
is able
Overlord.
to keep the masquerade of secrecy, and B, to create stories dealing with memory and knowledge. In universe,
It's kinda like the
these are
Men in
simply
Black little
chemicals that erase a normal human's memory
zap thing.
of some
I forgot what it's
amount of
called.
time. When the Foundation has to recover an anomaly in the
Makes
real
amnesia,
world,
essentially.
or seriously messes up, these are used. Things to read and do. There's more to the wiki than the SCP series. In this section, I open the door to the other areas of the site that are part of the Foundation universe, as well as answer some common questions about key but confusing parts of the site. What is SCP-1?
Okay, we're getting into the actual
early days of the
SCPs.
site, when the wiki was just getting started, there was some debate over what should be this sacred number. 1.
Is there an
Everyone agreed that it
SCP-0
had to be
though?
incredibly written. Everyone agreed that it had to be big, something deserving of the very first spot. But nobody could agree who should do the honor of writing it. The answer? Everyone can write their own vision of SCP-1.
So there's no set
Thus,
one
the system
then.
of proposals, an author's individual idea of number 1. They vary wildly and contradict each other. On the number 1 hub page, it says that the quote real number 1 is so secret that a number of false ones have been created. This explanation
interesting.
allows there to be multiple self-contradictory number 1s. One of them could be the true one to you. Or maybe you want a couple to be canonical at the same time. Maybe all of them are fake. Maybe all of them are true. It all depends on your canon and how much you like a given proposal. In effect, SCP-1 proposals are canon builders. Each one sets the tone for a particular author's vision of the Foundation itself.
Can we get a couple examples though?
Creating an SCP-1 proposal is as easy as writing it and then submitting it just like any other SCP. Although, unless you're incredibly experienced, it will most likely get rejected by the community and deleted. As of November 2017, 19 SCP-1 proposals have been successfully posted. Each one is the product of a lot of work and a high concept. Here are 6 of the 19.
Okay.
Number 1. Dr. Clef's proposal. The Foundation was established to prepare humanity for the rapture or apocalypse. SCP-1 is the angel guarding
Oh
Eden.
shit.
Number 2. Dr. Mann's proposal. The first and only natural anomaly was a spiral path in New York. A group of ambitious scientists experimented with reality using this as the thread and created every single other anomaly in the database.
So it all
Number
started
3.
there?
S. Andrew Swan's proposal. The SCP Foundation is aware of its fictionality. They are currently discussing ways to kill their authors.
Oh my god, that's a good one.
Roget's proposal. Keter-class anomalies are an inherent part of the universe and can be contained using each other. By releasing all Keter-class anomalies, the universe can be manually restructured. Number 5.
That one was a little
Mr.
confusing.
Gear's Cactus proposal. SCP-1 is one manifestation of the mechanical god worshipped by a clockwork cult, which wreaked havoc on the world before the military destroyed it.
Okay.
And finally, number 6. Kaladin's proposal. Humanity was originally a slave race whose suffering was harvested to create utopia on another planet. We escaped and then tried to cloak
Ooh,
ourselves.
yeah,
The
seems a
cloak
little
failed,
this
and
seems
our
interesting.
masters are trying to bring us home. It's my personal suggestion that you don't start with SCP-1.
I gotta admit, I like the first one about the Guardian, to the Guardian of Eden, and the one that said about the SCP knowing that they're fiction and they're trying to get the author's guild. I feel like those two would probably be my top 2 right now.
Read conventional SCPs before you take
Comment down below
one
which one was
deep
your
dive.
actual favorite, or whatever ones that were not mentioned here.
Special
'Cause he only mentioned 6.
-EX, -J, and -ARC. There are other types of documents that use the basic SCP format and style, but utilized in a different way. This allows different stories with more diverse tones and themes to be told. The SCP-EX classification designates an SCP that is no longer considered anomalous. It is explained. The object or phenomenon
So it's
in question
neutralized,
still
right?
exists, but the Foundation has deemed it to be an acceptable part of consensus reality. Or it was a giant fake-out, or it turned out to be just a new scientific
They
discovery.
do like to use a lot of big words in this, don't
An
they?
SCP-J is a joke SCP, a parody SCP, in a sense. Joke SCPs are explicitly non-canon, using the SCP format to joke around or make
So
fun
just
of
for
something
funnies.
for the benefit of the reader. They may riff on in-universe tropes like overwrought security, over-the-top containment, cold posting, or bad original characters. Or they may parody things like food poisoning, bad drivers, easily angered people, or that one movie. They may even make fun of the elements in the other popular SCP canons. Ultimately, a joke SCP is just a way to make the reader laugh. If a joke
Okay.
SCP is not well written and very funny, it'll be downvoted. And finally, we have SCP-ARC, archived SCPs. These are usually legacy pages from the very old days of the site, when standards were low and the mass edit had not been conducted yet. While most of these SCPs were deleted, some of them needed to have text archives due to their usage in other tales or still existing SCPs, or because they were historically
So kind of like extras.
ARCing is no longer in use since the opening of Series 2, 3, and 4, and you will most likely never need to read one of these.
Yeah,
Tales,
so extras.
canons, and collaborative logs. Tales are how the Foundation universe gets deepened and extended beyond the limits of the simple SCP file. It allows authors to tell stories where groups or people can interact with each other in the SCP universe, to expand on ideas already created in SCPs, or just, to write a prose. Some authors may also turn their tales into a series, usually if they have a cohesive idea in mind, or if it gets really popular. Notable series include There Is No Anti-Memetics Division, The Cool War, The Lombardi Tales, Tales of Mr. Collector, and Pitch Haven. You can find Tales in the top-rated Tales archive as submissions to a themed contest, or by trawling around and finding recommendations. You can also, as we'll soon learn, read the tales in a canon. A canon is your own set of assumptions about the tone, setting, and dynamic of the universe. Each of the canons in the Canon Hub is a wildly different set of assumptions based off the baseline SCP Foundation. Think of them as mega tale hubs, or parallel universes, or self-contained cinematic universes for authors to play in. Here are 5 notable canons. Broken Masquerade, a world where the Foundation's existence is known by everyone. Resurrection, a deliberate attempt to resurrect the action-orientated SCP Dr. Crazy Days of Series 1, in which an MTF composed of anomalous humans is formed. Third Law, a pulpy sci-fi paratech world dominated by the machinations of Prometheus Labs and Anderson Robotics. Rat's Nest, the military killed God,
What?
and the Foundation is covering it up. Reality is slowly unraveling and falling apart.
Ooh, that one seems interesting. I might take a look at that later.
Small-scale, poignant series set in the southern United States, usually having a restful, mysterious feel, and featuring religious symbolism and unconventional types of media.
Don't understand what that one's supposed to be
Pages on
about.
the site are tagged as collaborative. Collaborative logs or pages can be edited and added to by anyone, although some quality oversight still exists. This is a good way to get your creative chops and contribute whilst not taking the plunge of writing an SCP. The 3 main collaborative pages exist as lists of mini SCPs, very small-scale items or phenomena that don't need to have a narrative, but still need to be unique, appropriate, and interesting. They are Log of Anomalous Items, the SCP Foundation has discovered a substantial number of items which are simply too useless to merit further attention. This document lists those items which have prompted some curiosity. Log of extranormal events. This page is to document anomalous events that have attracted the Foundation's interests, but occurred too briefly for the Foundation to secure or contain them. And finally, Log of unexplained locations. This page is to be devoted to the documentation of low-threat anomalous locations which have been discovered by the SCP Foundation over the years. There are a number of other collaborative pages, usually SCP supplements or logs. Keep in mind that guidelines for contributions still apply though, and if your edition
I'm very
is deemed
curious
to be
though as to
below
when
standard,
he's in
it
again
will
for like what
probably
kind
be
of like
removed.
just a couple SCP examples. I mean, he gave us 6, but it's like I want to see like
The
ones from the
Foundation isn't
different
only
classes.
fish in the anomalous sea. Other organizations, collective and groups exist that utilize or create paranormal phenomena for their own purposes. Some are associates of the Foundation, others are rivals to it. Many of them
Ooh.
quietly pursue their own interests.
A couple of rogue
While a
groups, huh?
great many of them fall on the lines of good and or evil. The vast majority simply have a goal in mind that's somewhere in between. Here are 7 notable groups of interest. Are We Cool Yet? A collection of artists, usually producing surreal and disturbing works of art. Their pieces are designed to have maximum impact and are usually lethal in some way.
So deadly artists.
The Chaos Insurgency.
Deadly
A
artists.
rogue cell of the Foundation that uses terrorist means to steal and repurpose powerful anomalies to gain control over nations and conduct unethical experiments using them.
So these guys don't seem very
The
nice.
Church of the Broken God. A widespread cult believing in a clockwork god.
The
who is broken into
mechanical?
pieces all
The mechanical
over the
one,
world.
right?
Dr. Wondertainment. An individual or company that makes anomalous artifacts that are supposed to be children's toys.
Okay.
The Serpent's
Yeah.
Hand. A small organization headquartered in an interdimensional library, believing in anomalous rites and the normalization of the paranormal and magical.
But I mean, if they're trying
Marshall,
to just
Carter,
like, there's
and
some
Dodd.
that they say try to destroy the
Corporation
world.
that buys and sells anomalous items for the benefit of the
You know,
super
at
rich.
that point, you would need to take care of
Global
them.
Occult Coalition, or the GOC. A massive military organization under control of the UN, using technology and force to destroy the extra-normal wherever they find it. Many groups also have their own form of documentation, similar to an SCP. On the wiki, they are called GOI formats, and they are stories told from a different perspective than the Foundation.
Dude, just
For
the
more
amount
information, visit the
of
Groups of Interest page, as well as
backstory
the ongoing
and
Groups
just
of Interest
terminology
overview
of
and
what they've
guide
actually done
on
in
the
this
SCP
universe
Classified subreddit.
is insane. I mean, obviously, it's been around for what? It's
Beyond the
2007?
main site.
Yeah, 2007?
You can find
So, like,
stories and
a little over a
SCPs
decade
to
by
read,
now?
even beyond the classifications and places I've already detailed. In this final section, I present other outlets of writing associated or tied to the SCP Wiki that you can also look into. Firstly, a great place for you to discover lesser known but very well written tales and SCPs are in
Okay,
the Contest
almost done.
Archive. For example,
Looks like we're not going to get an
1000,
example
2000,
of other
and
ones.
3000 contests all have SCPs themed around urban legends, sci-fi, and horror, respectively. You have the Short Works contest, and the D-Class contest mentioned earlier, and the History contest for both Tales and SCPs. Then there are the gigantic, multi-part Mobile Task Force contest and Groups of Interest contest, and then the Dystopia and Reimagining contests, and so forth. There's so much to find. The Wanderer's Library is set in the mysterious, ancient, magical Library of the Serpent's Hand. It includes
That was
prose pieces
out
and
of
poetry
the
set in the SCP
the
universe,
Serpent's Hand was like
but focused on
a different
evoking
dimension,
sense
right?
of
It said?
wonder, of the extraordinary and fantastical. Quote, a sense that there is a larger world beyond the one we know. In the world of the library, these wonders are hidden, but never truly far away. But never forget that this is a wilder world than our own, and it's never entirely safe, either. And finally, we have the international foreign SCP branches. There's French SCPs, Russian SCPs, Japanese SCPs, and a whole bunch more. Each brand has their own set of SCPs, many of which have extremely creative and diverse ideas. If you're looking for more SCPs to read, this might be a place to find cool concepts. And if you don't know a foreign language, the main SCP-INT wiki hub has translations of some of them. This was entirely written by Reddit user Modulum83 over on the SCP Declassified subreddit. All links will be in the description.
Okay, let's talk about this just for a minute. So it didn't necessarily go into what I thought it was going to go into, where it would talk about more like about the SCPs and what they actually were and are. It was mainly just like a background of kind of like how to go about researching them. They did give 6 of them that were supposed to be for like the SCP-001, and they said there was 18 of them that have been passed, and the 2 that were the most interesting really to me was the one with the gay guardian, just because I mean I've read the story about the Garden of Eden and all that, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I might look into like seeing him in a different video. And also the fact that the SCP Foundation was aware that they were fiction and they were trying to get the writers killed. That seems interesting, because they did talk about that there was SCPs, right, that were like extra dimensional, or like they can like go to like a different dimension and all that. So I wouldn't be surprised if they had one that would come into the real world, I guess, like in the story, you know, or in these stories. So honestly, I was confused a lot, but it definitely gave me an idea as to like how much actual thought goes into these, and that they're all actually written by individual people. So that was interesting to find out. That's it for this video. This video is probably my longest one so far, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut it right here. Go ahead and leave a like if you liked it. Dislike if you didn't like it. It really helps me improve the channel. I will be posting a link to the original video down below by TheVolgun. And if you made it this far, also make sure to comment down below what SCP is really like an interesting one to get into. That way I can see it and then react to that in a future video. Alright, that's it for this video. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.